I know it's been a few days, but I'm back now. In today's video, I have the infamous Unit 522 joining me. So big thanks to him for helping me out on these creepy target stories. I hope you enjoy, and without further ado, let's get into the stories. And remember, as always, stay hungry. This is my first post. And although this happened back in December, I still think about it on a daily basis because it's unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. I hope that it offers some sort of an enlightenment on what to do and not to do if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. Back in early December, I had ventured out to do a bit of late night shopping. I'm a 31-year-old stay-at-home mother of 2 young children. So once my husband gets home from work, I like to take some time for myself to go shopping, take a drive or run errands, and do that kid-free. It was around 8:30 p.m. when I arrive at the Target that I frequent. Now, I'm by no means a paranoid or anxious individual, but I've taken several courses in human trafficking and I've done plenty of research on my own learning to identify the red flags, as well as what precautions to always take whenever I'm out in public alone. And especially at night. I carry several self-defense items on my person at all times just in case. I parked directly in front of the store next to a cart caddy and took a mental note of the vehicles that parked nearby again, just as precautions. I was taught at a really early age to always be observant of your surroundings, and being a control freak just naturally makes you that way. Nothing really seemed out of the ordinary that night, and the parking lot was actually quite empty, and most likely because it was a weekday. As I entered the store, I just began browsing like usual, following the natural flow of the store departments and following the main aisle around. I had only been browsing for maybe about 10 to 15 minutes when I noticed a young gentleman, mid-20s I think. He was tall and skinny and dressed in a dirty gray 2-piece sweatsuit and dark brown boots. He looked over at me, which I smiled and said hello, but his facial expression was completely blank. He looked like he may have been high on something by the look in his eyes, but he didn't really seem to care for my gesture, and he just quickly moved on. At first glance, there was really nothing in particular that alarmed me about him, except that I took notice at the fact that he was just wandering down the main aisle with no cart or basket. His hands were in his pockets, and he didn't seem to be with anyone. I just continued shopping with no second thoughts and made my way to the next department. Several minutes had passed at that point, and that's when I noticed a second young gentleman wearing the same exact gray sweatsuit, a similar pair of work boots, and again, no cart, no basket. He as well glanced right at me, then quickly darted his eyes right away when he realized I was looking directly at him. I started to become a bit more alerted at this point, but still remained composed and continued on browsing. Another 15 minutes or so had passed, and that's when a third older man had caught my attention. And you guessed it, same gray sweatsuit and work boots with no cart, no basket, and his hands right in his pockets. I assumed that they were in some sort of work uniform, maybe construction workers, but why weren't they walking around together, and why didn't they have any items to purchase? At this point, it was really difficult to focus on browsing. I just had a really bad feeling about these 3 men, and it became clear to me that something was definitely a bit off. Over the next 20 minutes or so, I felt as if I was being monitored by the 3 of the men, as if they were all communicating my whereabouts as I continued to make my way through the store. Because each department I entered, it didn't take long for me to notice one of the 3 men pass by whatever side of aisle I happened to be in, then making their presence known to me. I stayed completely vigilant while trying not to panic or allow my suspicions to overwhelm me. Something about their presence felt very heavy and dark, so I decided to test their intentions just to prove to myself that I wasn't overthinking the situation and that the bad gut feeling was definitely valid. I began picking random aisles and traveling back and forth between the departments in a very unorganized and random fashion, just to see if the men would continue to pass by me as frequently as they had been before. With every aisle I popped into, it was just a few minutes later that one of them would make an appearance, staring me down as they passed by. It honestly felt like I was being surrounded like a wild animal, hunted even. The scariest part of all of this is they were no longer trying to be conspicuous. Everything instinctual was just screaming at me to get the hell out of there. I started to grip my cart so tightly, and I figured if they got too close, I could just use the cart to try and push them away, or at the very least create some distance between us. By this point, I had been shopping for about an hour altogether, maybe a bit over, and I was ready to purchase my items, but I honestly felt too uncomfortable to continue browsing even if I wanted to. The men had been following me that whole time, and I was starting to become more annoyed if anything. Something that I want to add is the store was pretty empty around this time. One of the main reasons that I really like shopping at night, but that made this particular situation even more unsettling than it already was. 2 preteen girls were wandering around by themselves, which quickly caught my attention because the men had bypassed them as well, making similar advances. But of course, the young girls were seemingly oblivious. So I quietly and quickly got their attention and asked them to go find their parents and stay with them, trying not to freak them out. At this point, the mother in me was in full-on protection mode. I couldn't imagine having my young children with me this night. Thank God that they were home safe and sound. As I made my way to the checkout, I noticed one of the men coming up from behind me, walking at a quicker pace this time. So I immediately stopped and turned to lock eyes with him as he approached. I'm not kidding. I will never forget the darkness that I saw in his eyes. An eerie smirk formed on his face as he nudged my shoulder, just continuing to stare me down while walking backwards, all while holding on to his sinister gaze as he exited out of the store. I had lost sight of the other 2 men, and I hated the uncertainty of it all. He made his message clear to me in that very moment. My stomach dropped and my entire body began to shake. It was a feeling that I hadn't felt since I was a little kid getting lost in the supermarket. A feeling of desperation. I quickly walked to the checkout and discreetly asked the cashier if I could speak to a manager, and told them what had transpired over the last hour, and politely asking for a male employee to walk me to my car and for them to alert a member of their security. When I had finally told the manager everything that happened, her face had sunk as if she had already known about these men, and once I described them, she then confirmed that she knew exactly who I was talking about. She expressed to me that several of the female employees had found the men unsettling in the past. Then she reassured me that someone would definitely escort me to my car. She made a report about the incident and said she would alert the authorities. I was still shaking but felt pretty relieved that she believed me and also showing concern for the other young female patrons in the store. She took my information, then a young male employee walked me out to my car. What I saw as I exited the store made me so sick to my stomach, solidifying all of my suspicions. A white windowless van was parked in the lot directly behind my car. One of the men was seated in the driver's seat, and the other 2 were leaning against the side of the van facing my car, then attempting to hide out of view. I mean, how cliche and obvious can you be? Your license plate might as well read Lady Snatchers at that point. Whatever their intent, it didn't seem pure. I had pointed them out to the male employee and then said, "There they are, that's them," which then prompted all of the men to scurry into the van and speed out of the parking lot without any hesitation. I truly have no idea what would have happened to me if I walked out to my car alone, and I'm so freaking grateful that I made it home safe and sound and lived to tell my story. Over that following week, I had heard that there were several abduction attempts in the shopping center parallel to that target, and I'm almost certain that it was the exact same individuals. Human trafficking is very, very real. It's a very serious thing and it can happen to anyone. You really have to watch your surroundings.
This incident just occurred a few hours ago, and it's still making my head spin. Forgive me if it seems kind of lengthy, but an awful lot was said. I'm an 18-year-old female. My mother, sister, and I were shopping in our local Target. As we strolled around, I recognized a girl named Stacy, who's also 18. I used to go to school with her. For reference, I dropped out of high school in my senior year, so I haven't been in my old high school or even seen anyone from there for about a year now. I simply glanced at her and kept moving, doubting that she even recognized me. A few minutes later, I'm on the complete opposite side of the store when I see this girl again. Like last time, our eyes awkwardly met, and I tried just to walk past her, but this time she actually said something. "Hey, didn't we play tennis together?" Stacy said with wide eyes and a painfully large smile. There was a girl standing next to her, but I didn't recognize her. I simply replied yes in response. I was never friends with this girl in school. In fact, I never talked to her or even liked her. That's when she introduced herself, as if I completely forgot who she was. She goes on to question if I still went to high school, to which I explained that I graduated a year early with online classes. The conversation started out normal. I thought we were simply catching up, due to the fact that I had been absent from school. I kept wanting to cut the conversation short, but Stacy kept prodding about what I was doing now, if I was in college, and what was college like, harmless questions. Then, the conversation took an unexpected twist. Stacy somehow weaseled the conversation into one about God and Christianity. For reference, I do consider myself to be a Christian, but not one of those hardcore ones who are constantly spewing Bible quotes at strangers. She asked me if I attend church, to which I respond with yes, and her smile grew even bigger. Her whole mantra about God sounded something like this. "Back in my high school days, I was always partying and having fun, but it was all fake, and no one knew I was actually pretty sad. That's when I found this church that showed me God's way and His undying love. He accepted me, and He'll accept you too. Now I'm always happy, for I have God on my side. At this church, God truly appears before your very eyes. He cured me of all my physical and mental ailments, like when I messed up my knee playing tennis." The whole time Stacy spoke, there was just a robotic tone about it, as if her words were memorized, practiced, and rehearsed. There was almost no genuine emotion in her, just wide eyes and her never-failing smile. Then her friend Ashley, who was in her late teens or early 20s, began her speech. Keep in mind, my mother and sister are just an aisle away, waiting on me. Ashley's speech went something like this. "For a while in life, I suffered with depression and suicide. I was always faking being happy until I found this church. This church truly opened my eyes and my heart. I no longer feel dead inside." This is when she hinted that maybe I felt dead inside too, and the only way to recover from it was to look to God. Ashley also used the word zombie to describe this dead feeling, and that's when I began to really think that there was something wrong with these girls. Ashley continued, "I don't think it's a mere coincidence that we ran into you. God led me to you. He wanted me to reveal to you the way. God put a vision in my mind of you opening a present, and that present is our Lord and Savior." She kept on ranting about how this was destiny, and that God put Stacy and Ashley in my path to reveal Himself to me. When Ashley mentioned depression and suicide, I couldn't help but believe her for a slight second. I have been struggling with depression for years, but I've kept it quiet. And with me being a believer in God, I was almost fooled into thinking that this was a sign from God, telling me to finally open up and get help. But when Ashley began to ramble about her church, that foolish hope dissipated quickly. Then the two moved the conversation about their church. They kept stating that it was not just a normal church, and that God Himself, in flesh and blood, came to them at that church. They informed me that God came to them to heal all their miseries and grief. Ashley then pulled out a business card, which had the church's email, a Bible quote, and her personal phone number. Before the anticipated departure, they kept saying how cool I am, and that they were glad to have met me. Then we finally parted ways. I remember my legs being extremely weak as I walked away. That was when it clicked in my mind. Are they a part of some kind of cult? Their mannerisms and behavior seemed too scripted to be real. That's when my sister found me and answered my suspicions. Apparently, before I had to endure that 10-minute chat with Stacy and Ashley, my sister overheard the girls having the same conversation with someone else on the opposite side of the store. So this was all scripted, and it was their way of luring and persuading strangers to join their church. I realize now how they do it too. To reel me into their discussion, they talked about my absence from school and my experience in college. To reel in the other girl they talked with, they started off by complimenting her outfit and inquiring about her artistic hobbies. I wonder how many people they ended up talking to, and if they were just walking around the store hoping to find easy targets. I still have so many questions, and that's what bothers me the most about this. Being the somewhat religious person I am, their talk about God unnerved me. It's sort of humorous to think about it now, simply because I think crazy God lovers are comical, but I'm still bewildered. If you have any information about how cults operate and how they coax people into joining them, please let me know. Does this incident sound like cult members trying to spread their message, or harmless teenage girls simply spreading their love of God? If you have any other questions about what occurred in my interaction with them, please ask. It's also possible that I will see Stacy again, because she is attending my college next semester. Although Stacy and Ashley seemed harmless and just overly excited about God, I honestly just hope to never encounter them again.
So when I was 16 years old, I got my first job working at Target. Most of what I would do is just walk around the store tidying up and just stocking up shelves. Pretty easy job. One day I was stocking up food when a guy comes up to me to ask where a product was. I told him and I offered to show him where it was, so I walked him over and then started to leave. He was like, "Hey, wait!" And assuming he needed more help, I went back over to him and then he immediately started grilling me with questions.
How old are you? What ethnicity are you? Where do you live? Do you always work here?
And then to my dismay,
when do you get off work today?
he had a really creepy and unsettling smile, and he was vaguely cross-eyed, which in this weird situation just totally added to his creepy vibe. I just told him that I didn't know when I would get off work and deflected most of his other questions and then walked away. A couple of days later, he appeared in the store yet again and found me. I was really scared when I saw him, and he asked me again when I get off work and what I was doing after work. Again, I said I didn't know and started to walk away again. But then he started following me and then started telling me that I was so beautiful, just like his wife. Yeah, it was getting weird and I was getting really uncomfortable. So I tried to find a coworker and try to talk to him to get him away from me, or at least have someone else to witness his weirdness. Well, I couldn't find anyone, so I said that I had to go work at the cash register instead. That got him to go away, but not before he gave me the creepiest smile that I'd ever seen, and then said,
"I'll see you after work."
I was pretty creeped out at that point, and Casey stalked me home after work or waited in the parking lot for me. I didn't want to tell my manager since, I had just started my job, and I didn't really want to make a big deal out of it. I know, pretty stupid decision, but luckily nothing happened after work. The guy stopped showing up, and I don't think I ever saw him again after that. I guess he just wanted to scare me, but still, it was pretty creepy nonetheless. I'm a short, medium-sized girl. One day around the time that I was 8 months pregnant, I decided to make a trip out to Target to buy some things. I'm a very cautious person, constantly looking at my surroundings with mild paranoia, which was mostly inherited from my mom, who raised 3 kids all on her own, so she was always on guard. I got out of my new car, which I parked a little far from the store entrance, for 2 reasons. I didn't want to get any dents from the other drivers, and I tried to get as much exercise as possible since I was pregnant. As I'm walking, I notice a huge red truck with 3 men inside of it with the windows down. I assumed that they were just waiting for someone inside the store, but something creeped up my neck when I then made eye contact with the driver. I quickly turned away and then immediately began to feel self-conscious. A small girl that was visibly pregnant, I suddenly felt so vulnerable. Up until that point, my pregnancy was pretty smooth and never really made me feel like a target. Once I finally got in the store, I started to calm down a bit more and feel a bit relaxed and went about my shopping. When I left the store though, I noticed that the same truck was still there. I put my bag in the trunk and got in my car as quickly as possible, then quickly turned it on and drove away. I noticed in my rearview mirror that the same truck was also taking off, with the same 3 men still inside of it. My heart sank. I had realized right then and there that they weren't waiting for anyone inside the store. I got into the lane that can only make a left turn, and they were in a lane that can only go straight a few cars behind me. I thought, great, we're not going in the same direction. I was just being paranoid. As I passed the light, now turning, I see the red truck then switch the lane that I was in to turn left. I then sped up to catch the next light turning yellow to put as much distance between them and me. I drove a little faster than usual, but that's when I realized that even if I made it home, they could still follow me there and I would be going home to an empty house. So instead, I decided to drive past my street right to a shopping center that had a Starbucks. The drive-thru wraps around the building, so you're not going to be visible to the main road which I was driving in. I get into the drive-thru and I notice the red truck was going on the road that I just left. They drive past the Starbucks and I think, good, I'm in the clear now. As I'm still in the drive-thru, I then see the truck pass by again in the opposite direction, almost as if they're looking for me. I wait in the drive-thru for all of the other cars to leave, and I decide to call my sister and tell her I'm heading to her place. I didn't want to go home alone, and my boyfriend wouldn't be home for several hours. As I'm driving to my sister's house, which is about 25 minutes away, my mind just begins to wonder if they had ever caught up to me or what could have happened if these men were following me. Any possible danger that could have happened to me or my baby made me so paranoid that I didn't even leave my house for the remainder of my pregnancy. By the time I got to my sister's, I was absolutely shaking over it. I had told my sister all of the details and everything that happened. I never did see the men again or their red truck, and I'd really like to keep it that way.
When I lived in the city, going to Target was a daily thing. One day I had to go find some pants to wear for a party, so I went to Target to see what they had and if I could find anything I liked. I noticed this guy walked in behind me, and every time I turned around, he happened to be there. So I thought it was just a coincidence, since we would always end up on the same aisle. I walked over to the makeup to look for some new foundation because mine was gone, and I just happened to turn around and he was standing right there. So at that point, I knew something was up. He wasn't holding anything, just standing around trying not to make eye contact with me every time I would look at him. I walked to the checkout because I wasn't feeling comfortable anymore. I had this gut feeling that if I stayed in the store, something would end up happening. He then followed me to the checkout line. Nothing was in his hands, so he had nothing to pay for. He just stood there looking around. He was acting like I couldn't see him or even feel him looking at me. It was as if he was trying to stare into my soul. I paid and grabbed my stuff, but instead of walking out of the store, since I didn't want him to follow me out to my car, I instead walked over to the other end of the store to use the bathroom. He didn't follow me to begin with, but when I walked out of the bathroom, he was standing right there in the men's section, looking at underwear and socks. Again, not holding a single thing. So I decided to walk around the store some more, just to see if he would follow me again, and he did. So I found the manager and pulled him to the side, and whispered to him that an older man had been following me around the store the whole time I was there, and that I've been walking around since I checked out, just trying to lose him. The manager told me that there had been prior kidnapping attempts related to sex trafficking, and something like this happened a couple of months ago. He told me that I was smart to stay in the store. He then called the police, and the guy left the store before they showed up. If you ever have a gut feeling, you should listen to it, because that day could have ended a whole lot worse for me. A little background. Around November of 2019, I was running to a Target for some cupcake decorating supplies before meeting my aunt and cousin for lunch later that day at a relatively nice restaurant. With this being the case, I was slightly dressed up. Nothing too fancy, but I did look slightly older. It was around 10 in the morning, and I was walking to my car from the Target. I typically park pretty far back in parking lots, because I hate fighting for parking spots. Suddenly a truck pulls into a parking spot a little ways in front of me, and a man gets out. I freaked out as he started to walk up to me. He asked me if I was single, and then tells me that I'm the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. I tell him that I'm underage and I have a boyfriend. I lied about that part, to which he replies that he would wait. This man had to be at least 40 years old. He then gets back into the truck and backs into a spot at the back of the parking lot. I was about halfway to my car at this point, but there was no way in hell I was going back to my car because I could tell that he was watching me. So I instead walk into a nearby frozen yogurt place. I was visibly shaken. I quickly grabbed a cup of yogurt and tried my best to look natural, because this guy was looking at me through the window. I called my best friend who lives in the neighborhood, close to the shopping center, and he quickly said that he would be there soon. About 10 to 12 minutes later, my friend came and picked me up from the yogurt place. When we pulled out of the parking lot, the man in the truck started to follow us. I texted my aunt to tell her that I would be about 30 minutes late for lunch. My friend took a bunch of back roads in the area and drove through some confusing neighborhoods, and we eventually lost the truck. My friend is my absolute hero, and he took me back to my car in the parking lot. I was going to run some small errands before going to lunch, but that obviously didn't happen.
So I just got back from the store and I've got to tell you about this experience I just had. It may not be as scary as some of the other encounters, but it still gives me the chills. Let me start this story off by saying that this morning I wasn't in the best of moods. I had to work the graveyard shift last night, and I woke up after only 4 hours of sleep with my back absolutely killing me. I couldn't get back to sleep, so I decided to run a few errands since I was now wide awake. I needed to get a haircut while I was out as well. My sister works at a salon that is right next to a Target. So after I got my sister to mow my scalp, for free by the way, I popped over to Target to grab a couple of items before heading home. So I'm just doing my thing and pushing my cart down the frozen food section, and I turned the corner to go into the next aisle. When I did, there was a middle-aged lady that was pushing her cart heading in the opposite direction. I nearly bumped into her, but then stopped before our carts collided. She gave me a mean look and then said in a really mean tone, "Excuse me?" Now again, I have to say I wasn't in the best of moods, and I'm a short-tempered person as it is. So without thinking, I take a shot back at her and then said, "Oh, shut up. You're fine. Call me an ass if you want. No one's perfect." But what happened next was just pure insanity. The lady then suddenly left her cart and then started to follow me. I noticed this about halfway down the aisle, and I then turned around to ask her what her problem was. And then, I kid you not, she rolled her eyes to the back of her head, pointed at me, and then screamed very loudly. And when I say screamed, I mean she was literally shrieking at the top of her lungs. It was like something right out of The Exorcist. I hurried down the aisle to try and get away from this insane person, but she started running after me. Needless to say, all of the bystanders immediately stopped what they were doing and then just stared at us. The lady kept screaming like a banshee at the top of her lungs while she chased me around the store. Well, I noped the hell out of there, ran out of the exit of the store, and I looked back into the store as I was heading for my car. The lady was standing just outside the now open automated sliding doors, just staring at me. While she stood there, her mouth was hanging wide open and she was still just pointing at me. Her eyes were still rolled right into the back of her head, and all you could see were the white of her eyes. She suddenly turned around, then quickly walked back into the store. I decided to pick up my stuff at Walmart that was just down the street instead. All I could think though the entire drive home was, what the hell was that? That was insane. So to the creepy screaming, possibly possessed banshee lady, I mean, perhaps I shouldn't have been so rude to you, but you still have more than one screw loose in your noggin, and you really need help. But anyways, I definitely hope to never encounter you in the future. So this all takes place in August of last year, right before I moved to a different state for school. This story involves myself, 18 at the time, and my sister and cousin, both 14 at the time. And on the day in question, we decided to go on what we like to call an Uzi adventure, where we basically get in the car and pretty much just drive until we find something to do. On this day, we decided to go to a Target, but instead of the one we usually go to, we decided to go to a different one that was in the south end of the city which we lived near. A little bit of background about the area I lived in. I grew up most of my life just outside of Detroit, but moved to a more bougier area when I got in high school. The part of this area I lived in was in more of a suburban downtown side, but on the south end. It was pretty well known that all of the weird and dangerous people lived down there. Some examples. A few months before this incident, a black boy was shot walking to school by some retired firefighter just for asking for directions. And just this year, a lady was found nude, attacked, and then strangled, and was then bitten multiple times on the face by her attacker, which also happened just down the road from this Target. But thankfully, she did survive. Anyways, for some reason, I still didn't really know why we decided to go to the South Target instead of our usual one. However, we get there and my sister and my cousin get a couple of things for school while I just pick up a CD. We check out and we go out to the car and we see a green Chevy Trailblazer that's now parked right next to my car. I didn't really notice anything unusual besides the fact that the driver's seat was then reclined all the way back, and the window was slightly open and it looked like someone was sleeping in the car. My sister gets into the passenger seat and my cousin right behind her, and literally the second she got in the car, she said, drive the hell out of here right now." I didn't really think too much of it though because she didn't really sound panicked or anything, at least not to me. So I do as she said and I start to drive, and once we pulled onto the main road, that's when she told me that she saw some old man lying in the driver's seat jerking off to people walking past. More specifically, children and their moms. My cousin then says she saw him too, and we of course freaked the hell out and tried to decide what we should do. We ended up pulling over in a Staples parking lot and sitting there, trying to just decide if we should call the cops or not. My sister is crying at this point and having an anxiety attack because she thought that she'd get in trouble with our parents for calling the cops. I eventually convinced my cousin to call 911 for us and put in a report, because my sister was still crying about not wanting to call the cops, and I really suck at phone calls, so it was really just best if my cousin did it. Maybe about a half an hour later or something right after the incident, we get a call from the police pretty much telling us that they found him in the car with his pants off and his tic tac out, and that since he was a repeat offender and did this apparently extremely often, we needed to come to the station to file an official report. We tried to convince them to allow us to make it at the Target parking lot since they were there still, but they wouldn't allow it. I also want to add that during all of this, our parents had no idea what was going on, and I'm not really sure we wanted them to know. Specifically my aunt because, well, she's pretty well known to blow stuff extremely out of proportion, and she would probably never let my cousin out of the house again. But now that we're going to be at the station, we really had no other choice but to tell them. So we tell our parents, and my mom, dad, brother, aunt, and uncle and cousin all meet us up at the station. I remember too that there was maybe about 1 or 2 POs on duty that night, and we had to wait a couple of hours while they called the detective at his house. So he literally ended up interviewing us right in his pajamas in the fax room. Months later, I was going to school in another state when we all got subpoenas to come to court. We ended up having to go to court 2 separate times, and I actually had to fly home for about a month or 2 the second time, because he apparently appealed or something before eventually pleading guilty the second time around, and now he's out on parole after pretty much serving no time in jail. To end this story, we don't go to that Target anymore ever. The last that I've heard about this was a call from the parole officer, pretty much just asking my viewpoint and if I ever go to therapy over it. I guess on a lighter note though, because my family and I have a pretty warped sense of humor, we now refer to it as the pickle tickler incident. Anyways, 74-year-old man that we found tickling your pickle in your car to little kids and caused us to spend hours at the police station. Let's definitely not meet again. Ever.